Hi, this is Lisa Rothfuss, and today I want to present to you Keeping Your Sanity, what an alienated parent or grandparent can do to shift into a more positive mindset. I'm a therapist here in Austin, Texas, with over 36 years of counseling with children and families. I specialize in reunification therapy and treating alienation, both mild, moderate, and severe. I've worked for 9 years in the Texas family court system, and I've worked as a guardian ad litem, a co-parent counselor, parent coordinator, and facilitator. And I'm now a board member also for Family Access. So I do a lot of YouTube videos and presentations. But I think the presentation I'm going to give tonight is maybe one of the most important topics that I speak on for alienating parents. Because parents that have been alienated from their children, as we know, are all experiencing many levels of trauma. Not just emotional trauma, but also financial trauma, physical trauma to the body. And when you're being alienated, I think the overriding experience that you have is one of complete loss of control of your life. You've lost control over how your children treat you. You've lost control over them seeing you, spending time with them, how your ex is responding to you. You have no control of the court system when you're going to get a court date. It's just all of these experiences of loss of control. And I think that contributes a lot to the trauma. And you have to start to ask yourself, how is this affecting me? And what do I really have control over at this point? And the answer to this is really the only thing you have control over in the midst of all of this chaos is yourself. And alienation, you experience this kind of loss and trauma that can have just significant negative consequences on your emotional and physical health. You can learn how to take care of that relationship, though, that you have with yourself, because it really is the most important relationship you have of all. And if you don't learn how to manage it, then you really will succumb to certain kind of physical and emotional issues due to the trauma that you experience as an alienated parent. So we talk a lot about self-care, and we think of self-care as, yes, exercising, eating well, being in nature, taking time off, resting, relaxing, talking to family and friends, retreats, traveling, even doing special things for yourself. But I would like to offer to you tonight kind of a new way of thinking about self-care. And I would like to not only talk about that, but discuss actual strategies and practices for making permanent changes in your life around these issues. And I want to discuss how important it is not only for you to learn about self-care, but also how it is going to affect the relationship with your child. So I'd like to start with a story. This is really an interesting story. I have been following this client for a number of years. Recently saw the mom, and I'll give you the ending of the story later. But at the point in which this mom came into me, it was about 2 years ago, at least, maybe 3. And she had been the primary caregiver for 12 years for her son. And all of a sudden, she and her son started to have a lot of difficulty together. A lot of it was around his poor school performance, her trying to push him to get things done, him not wanting to do them. She was struggling with a lot of depression and serious mood swings from the divorce, being on her own, being a single parent. And she had to deal with her ex's disapproval of her more structured parenting style, which we see all the time. One parent is a little more structured, the other parent's a little more loose, and the child wants to gravitate towards the parent who is a little bit loose. And basically, they did end up going to court, and it was decided that there would be a custody change, and dad got primary. And after he went to live with his dad, of course, predictably, her son began to say that he didn't want to come to her house. And the father said, of course, you don't have to go. And the father really wasn't willing to support the possession and access schedule at all. So eventually, her son said, the dad said to the son, well, you don't have to go if you don't want to go. So, of course, that's when I enter the picture, and the courts asked me to help to reunify them. And I started to meet with mom to get to know her. And after having 2 or 3 sessions, I started to notice some important features about my sessions with her. I noticed that she was incredibly angry, frustrated, preoccupied with all of the faults of her ex. She just couldn't get her brain to almost talk about anything else. And that frustration and all of the ways it was preventing her from having a relationship with her son. She talked over and over about the unfairness of the situation. It made no sense. She had been the mom taking care of him for 12 years. How could this happen? And I began to notice that there was just these incredible amount of obsessive negative narratives that were permeating our sessions. So it quickly became clear to me that her repeated negative thoughts, and what we can refer to as RNTs, were actually seriously affecting her relationship with her son, because every time they got together, she just got so upset and frustrated and angry, and she showed all of these emotions. And the son, of course, was backing away from her and didn't really want to see her at all. So I said to her, I think you have a couple of choices here. I've just really noticed a lot of what we've been talking about. And I feel like you're kind of stuck in your negative thoughts. And I've noticed that you seem pretty depressed and you're struggling in your relationship with your son. So you could continue to talk about the negative thoughts that I know you're having. I know they're real. Or we could start working on the fact that this has happened. Start accepting the situation. This is the decision that was made. There isn't really anything you can do right now to change that, but you could start shifting your mindset. And we could maybe help you to stop dwelling on the negative thoughts and work on feeling more positive about you and your life and begin to improve, hopefully, the relationship with your child. Now, this is not uncommon. This mom isn't unusual, and she represents so many of the parents I see that are alienated from their children. So it is hard not to focus on the unfairness of it, the anger, the frustration you have around the situation. But an interesting thing happens in the brain, and that is that the brain is often so insistent upon looking at the negative in a situation that neuroscience have actually named this negativity bias. The brain just starts noticing all of the negative qualities, negative thoughts. So what is negativity bias? Well, that's when the human brain has a tendency to give more importance to the negative experiences than the positive and neutral experiences. I am sure you are all aware of situations where a parent who's reuniting with a child goes out on a visit. And at this visit, the child actually has numerous positive interactions with the parent. They have a pretty good time overall. Maybe 1 or 2 things come up, but mostly they do really well together. But when the child comes home, what do they report? They report the 1 or 2 things that they didn't like. They never talk about the other opportunities, the other 10, 15, 20 experiences that were all really positive. And then, of course, everybody really, clamps onto the negative experiences, and that's the ones that get talked about and blown up out of proportion. And of course, the ones that come into my office, and we have to spend a lot of family therapy time talking about them. So, alienated parents definitely struggle with dwelling on negative thoughts. My child doesn't want to come to my house anymore. My son is always angry and disrespectful to me when we're together. My ex is always saying negative things about me to the kids. Now, that's probably all true. That probably is all happening. However, what does all of that thinking, that negative thinking, do to your brain when you're having all of those negative thoughts? There's certain things that start to happen to you in your mind and in your body. And one of those is that you activate a cascade of stress hormones. And these stress hormones cause the brain to become fixated on the potential threats that you're experiencing in your environment. And eventually, you are so focused on these threats that you can't even see the bigger picture of how your current behavior is limiting you. So one of the very biggest stress hormones, obviously, is cortisol. And people who are alienated from their children, alienated parents, really suffer from what we call chronic traumatic stress. And that is stress that happens when you experience a life event that causes so much fear and anxiety and helplessness. And this is obviously the situation that a lot of alienated parents find themselves in for long periods of time. And what happens is our bodies are not really set up to handle long-term effects of stress hormones, but you dump cortisol and adrenaline into the body continuously for long periods of time when you're struggling with chronic traumatic stress, and very difficult specific things begin to happen in the body. So let's talk about, how does cortisol actually affect you? Well, I know we hear about it all the time, but I think it's actually pretty amazing how cortisol is actually essential to almost every organ and tissue in the body. So when people say that stress affects you in all areas of your life, well, they're not kidding. It definitely affects all areas of your body. And it is known widely as the stress hormone, but it actually has a lot of functions in all kinds of body, regulating all kinds of body stress responses. Now, the other interesting thing about cortisol is your body continuously monitors cortisol all of the time because it has to maintain a certain amount of homeostasis. So if for some reason you are dumping huge amount of cortisol into your body all of the time, then guess what? Cortisol is actually stealing from all the other hormones in your body to maintain homeostasis. So how does that affect you? Well, if you have high levels of cortisol in your body for long periods of time, there are a number of things that are going to start to happen to you. First of all, it's definitely going to lower your immune system. It also affects all sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Your body actually has a very difficult time handling aging. So you cannot actually handle anti-aging very well in your body if cortisol is always dumping. And it interferes with brain functions, mood, your ability to think. It actually causes a lot of brain fog. I tell parents all the time, if you send a child to school and they are really upset, they're in a high stress situation, and they are having a very difficult, anxious, provoking day, and you ask them to learn, they can't actually take in information and put it into their long-term memory. So it's incredible how cortisol affects our memory and our ability to think. And cortisol also, if it goes on for long periods of time, will actually blow out your whole adrenal system. And you will experience a fatigue like you've never known before. Almost like you just can't get up and you can't move. So this is why it's so crucial to figure out how to actually handle these negative thoughts and emotions. As an alienated parent, you're definitely going to have them. They're going to be there. So you have to figure out, what am I going to do to help myself? Repetitive negative thoughts. There was a lot of research that's been done on RNT. Some of it is come out of King's College London. And they talk about how the habit of prolonged negative thinking actually diminishes your brain's ability to think, to reason, to form memories, and essentially drains your brain's resources. And they propose that RNTs are a common symptom of many psychological disorders, which I'm sure we all know, because you experience that sense of depression, anxiety, sleep disorders, post-traumatic stress, and obviously life stress. So it's not really surprising that alienated parents really suffer from RNTs. But here's the more, I guess in some ways interesting, but also kind of sad news about repetitive negative thoughts. Scientists have also discovered that negative emotions have an addictive quality that actually trigger the reward centers in the brain. Every time you have a negative thought, over and over and over, and you get used to having negative thoughts and you want more, you're seeking more negative thoughts, your brain gets a hit of dopamine. And you feel like you're rewarding yourself when you're succumbing to these negative emotions. Here's another great saying that neuroscientists talk about. What fires together, wires together. The brain gets good at what it does. And if what it does is constantly think about the negative, then that's what you're creating in your brain over and over again. Negative thoughts create these channels in the brain, and this thinking becomes the default for you. And if you do a lot of negative thinking, you wire your brain to be good at negative thoughts, and not only to be good at the negative thoughts that you're having maybe about alienation or your child or your ex, but you begin to see negative in all the different areas of your life. And so this is how they become so dangerous to us and to our brains. So that's why I would like to propose a very different definition about self-care. And that I think that taking a walk, doing a yoga class, spending time in nature, these are all really important activities. But I think self-care is more than that. I think it's really an inside job. And the deeper level of self-care is really about examining your thoughts and teaching yourself to change your thinking. Change what goes on in your brain, because that's what you really have the control over. So this is a new kind of self-care I'm putting out there, an inside job. Alienation is traumatic, and it can color your entire way of thinking. And this new kind of self-care is about you having to decide to actively train your brain in a new direction. It's a very active process. And by doing that, you can begin to lay down new neural pathways. You actually are teaching yourself to shift your thoughts away from focusing on what you've lost, what you're missing, what isn't fair. So you're reframing how you think about self-care. And real self-care is about reaching a completely new mindset and reinforcing this mindset daily. So it's crucial that you think a little bit about, are these thoughts affecting the quality of your life? If I have these thoughts, are they affecting the quality of my life? Is it being more negatively impacted as a result of thinking these things over and over again? Where am I stuck in my thinking? Where am I reinforcing all of these negative thoughts to myself? What areas of my life am I reinforcing those in? What negative narratives are you constantly reinforcing in your thinking? And how much of your day do you do that? So letting go of persistent negative thoughts is actually a form of self-care. And you cannot begin to take care of yourself until you actually take this step of noticing. Negative thoughts become a habit. So we talk about having a habit crisis. How you think and feel begins to affect all areas of your life. So here's the question. Can you reverse hardwire habits? Yes, absolutely you can. I think I skipped one. Nope, I didn't. Okay. So there's 2 steps to rewiring the brain. And the first one is you have to notice your negativity bias. You've got to start noticing when you actually are thinking certain things. And then you have to make a conscious decision to shift the negative to the positive. So let's talk a little bit about those 2 steps. We're going to start with noticing. This is step 1. You've got to start noticing your negativity bias. You've got to notice the repetitive negative thoughts and the mindset that you find yourself in most of the time. Am I mostly sad, angry, frustrated, happy, peaceful, serene? You have to bring awareness to the ordinary habits of the mind. You have to catch yourself when you slip into self-doubt, rumination, anxiety, fear. And notice when your mind starts to spin out those worst case scenarios, like, what if I never see my child again? And we call this kind of noticing metacognition. You have to develop metacognition. This is how we think about our thinking. We start to notice our thoughts. And this is the first step in making the change. Now, how do you develop metacognition? Well, I know this is probably not an answer that you're going to be, really excited about, but one of the best ways is actually meditation. And people talk about meditation all the time. And you may even have tried it a little bit and thought, no, I don't know if this is for me, but it is one of the best ways to actually start noticing your thinking. So let me tell you a little bit more about how the meditation is so important to the brain. And that is when you are in a meditative state, when you get your mind to really focus on the present moment, your breathing, some kind of a noise, sound, whatever, you are actually dumping neurohormones and neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, melatonin, these are all your feel-good chemicals, your relaxation chemicals, into the limbic regions of your brain. And that's what causes that feeling of general well-being and positive emotions. But how does meditation actually affect the brain? Well, we now have a lot of research studies that have found that meditating consistently, is associated with actually changing the brain, what we call brain morphology. Meditation actually engages and builds up the higher order brain regions, like prefrontal cortex. This is the area that actually increases awareness, so metacognition, concentration, so you're able to focus better, and impulse control. And that's huge because I think a lot of times when you're an alienated parent, it's very easy to find yourself becoming overwhelmed with emotions. And this is a way to notice them and then be able to make a decision to regulate yourself. Hippocampus for learning, anterior cingulate cortex for motivation, actually starting to feel like you can do something again. So how does it help? Well, mindfulness meditation can reduce symptoms of post-traumatic stress, which we know many of our alienated parents deal with, 73% of the time. That's an incredible statistic. And research at Stanford University has shown that meditation can lead to a 30% decrease in stress-related symptoms that are often associated to serious illness. It also reduces cortisol, and we know how bad that is, and it helps actually save your brain and improve your physical and emotional health. It certainly improves the immune system. So let's talk about starting a meditation or mindfulness practice. Now, here's the good news. You don't really have to sit and meditate a whole lot in a day. You don't have to do 20, 30, 40 minutes. It's not like that. You can do 5, 15, if you want, tops 20 a day. And just that amount over time can significantly increase the changes in your brain. It will heighten your awareness. It will deepen your thought level. It will decrease your emotional reactivity, like we talked about. And not to mention, it's going to help with all kinds of emotional, psychological, and physical benefits. Now, there's always that thought of, well, how do I start a meditation practice? Like, I've tried this before. It doesn't seem to really work for me. Well, it is hard, I think, to get started a little bit. And sometimes it helps to have some guidance. So, of course, in the modern world where we live, there's an insight timer app, or there are meditation apps. This is the one that I've used for a long time, and I really love it. And it is free. You can buy an advanced version that costs a little bit more, but you can use it for free. And this is very popular and used by many, many, many people. And I love this timer because you can go to it each morning, and it'll ask you a question, like, what kind of mood are you in today? And let's say I say I'm in a good mood. Well, then it pops up for me, I don't know, 5 or 6 different meditations that are appropriate for my mindset for that day. And it also will, can give you a range of time, like maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15. So you can choose the amount of time you want, and you can look at the different kinds of meditations that are being offered. Some of my favorites that I'll just put out there for you is the Gratitude Affirmations by Reverend Skip Jennings. It's 5 minutes. You listen to it first thing in the morning when you get up, and it kind of gets your brain into this positive place, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And another one I love is Wake Up Positive, which is where you have 14 minutes, about 14 minutes by Andrew Johnson. Wonderful, wonderful way to wake up in the morning. And these are just, a few things. There are other apps out there too. Now, meditation is not the only way to build the ability to notice your thoughts. There is obviously therapy as well. And if you are struggling with serious depression, anxiety, impulse, emotional control, obviously getting into some kind of therapy can be helpful. But there are several types of therapy that are more helpful, I think, than others. And a couple of them I want to talk about. One is cognitive behavioral therapy, which really helps you to become aware more of negative thinking so you can view challenging situations more clearly. You're going to take certain negative statements, you're really going to break them down, you're going to examine them from different perspectives, and your therapist is going to help you maybe to find a different way of thinking about a negative statement that you have about yourself. And then there's another one called dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, which is a modified form of cognitive behavioral therapy, which includes mindfulness practices. And it teaches you about mindfulness practices, how to develop ways to cope with stress, and to regulate emotions. So this is very good if you're having difficulty with negative emotions. Now, the big thing about therapy is it can be very, very beneficial. But here is a warning. Make sure that you do not repetitively spend your time in sessions revisiting all those past negative experiences, feelings, and emotions that you are having. And I saw that with my client that I was talking about in the beginning. It wasn't going to really help us to keep having sessions, or help her to keep having sessions where she just talked more and more and more about all of her negative emotions and feelings. This just reinforces the negative, and we've already talked about how that happens in the brain. So if you're going to work with a therapist, be sure you and your therapist are building an awareness of your feelings and your emotions and learning how to shift your thoughts, actually working on strategies for shifting. Here's a great saying that they use in treating clients who have anxiety issues, that you can't erase negative thoughts. They are there, they are happening, but you can replace them with slightly more positive thoughts. And over time, that can build and the thoughts can become increasingly positive. So, it is definitely possible to uncover negative thoughts on your own. You don't have to have a therapist to do it, but I think there's an important thing you need to understand if you're going to do it on your own. And that is that if you start to feel that rage, that frustration, that sadness, that depression, you want to see this as your warning signal. Okay, I'm having this strong emotion, and I know this strong emotion, under this strong emotion is some very negative thoughts that I need to identify. So you need to stop. You need to write them down. Getting some kind of a journal, some kind of a notebook, keep it on your phone, whatever you can do to start trying to really bring to mind what that negative thought is and become aware of it, because you can't change it if you're not aware of it. And things like my child hates me. My ex has all of the power. I will never recover financially. So good questions to ask yourself if you're doing this on your own is, what negative thoughts are you constantly reinforcing in your thinking? And if you're writing down what's happening for you, you're going to start to see patterns. You're going to start to notice the same things coming up. And then you're going to realize, okay, this is an area that I really need to pay attention to. And then I love this question. How much of your day did you spend thinking these repetitive negative thoughts? Was most of your day spent thinking and you were in this particular mindset that was so negative and toxic to your brain? So here's the next really big step, is now that you become aware and you notice, you need to rewire. You have to hack your brain's reward system to start to change your habits. And can the brain change? We said yes, but here's why. The brain has the ability to physically reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. And this is where the real work for you begins. How are you going to do that? How are you going to hack your brain? Well, there are a number of strategies that you can use to take control of your thoughts and rewire the negative to the positive. And I'm going to talk to you today about 6 of them. It says 5, but it's actually 6, so that's typo. There's actually 6. And the first one is called getting into the positive zone. So this is one of those things where the negative brain sometimes just doesn't know where to start. It just sees the negative. It doesn't know how to find the positive. So you have to start bringing the positive to the brain. You need to start your day with something inspirational and get into the positive mindset or the positive zone right away. And that means before you even get out of bed, before your feet ever even touch the floor. When you wake up in the morning, your first thought needs to be, okay, what's something positive I can start thinking about? Maybe you start your day with a meditation. Maybe you start it with a prayer. Maybe you start it with a spiritual reading or a reading of some sort that's inspirational to you. I wake up every morning and start my brain right away on something positive, an inspirational reading, so I can get my brain primed right away because I know I can get into the negative thoughts very easily. And I know this is good self-care for my brain and for my health. I have to start the day in this more positive way. So you've got to train your brain to the positives all day. And if you don't know what those are, your brain can't think of them, then you're going to need help. But the cool thing is there's so many things out there now to help you. And remember, you can't erase, but you can replace. So let's talk about ways to replace. Well, this is where YouTube videos are amazing. There are so many great YouTube videos out there from inspirational people that you can listen to all day long. And they're free. You can listen to them in your car, when you're driving, you can listen to them when you're at your desk. They're all over the place. And so I listen constantly to things. I'm always finding something to keep my brain focused on that positive. I work with a lot of people who are having very difficult situations. If I don't continuously train my brain to think positively, I too will start to have a very difficult time. So it's really a sense of self-preservation. There's a great TED Talks, very famous, so many views. It's by Alison Ledgerwood, called A Simple Trick to Improve Positive Thinking. I encourage you to go watch that because that's a great one. Watch it all the way to the end, because some of the best parts are right at the end of it, by the way. And there's another cool thing I saw on TED Talks, which is really neat. It's called the 10-Day Challenge. And it says for the next 10 days, watch one TED Talk from this list to shift yourself into a life of positive thinking. So there's a whole bunch of different things you can watch there. Now, here's someone I want to talk about that I think is very inspirational to listen to. Many of you may know about him. He is very popular. His name is Dr. Joe Dispenza. He's a researcher and lecturer and author. And his training includes the fields of neuroscience, neuroplasticity, we know what that is, epigenetics, mind-body medicine, and brain-heart coherence. He has done a lot of work looking at the science behind how we heal our minds and our bodies. So his books are fabulous, and they're called Evolve Your Brain, The Science of Changing Your Mind, and Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, which I love. And the reason I think this is so amazing, he will talk about how almost every day when we wake up, we start off with some of the very same thoughts every day. Like, okay, what am I worried about today? What's on my list today? What haven't I done? What do I need to do today? And before you even get out of bed, you've already started all of this negative stuff in your head. And you do it every day. And then you get up and you follow the same routine every morning, and you have the same thoughts every morning. And he's like, if you have the same thoughts and the same thinking and the same patterns every single day, you cannot possibly cause yourself to have any changes in your brain or your thinking or your life. And you have to figure out how to detach yourself and start to change those patterns. And by the way, he is a big, huge proponent of meditations. You can even find some of his meditations for free on YouTube and listen to them if you're interested. He has a whole website. He does trainings and workshops all over the world. He's really well known. And I think it's really fun to go listen to his stuff. If I'm having a day where I really need to remind myself of the importance of how my brain works and what I need to do to shift, I will often just go listen to one of his lectures or one of his talks for maybe 15 minutes. But of course, that's not it. We've got even more stuff that can help us with happiness. There are actually amazing happiness apps, which I think are actually really fun. And they're science-based happiness apps that are based on positive psychology and principles to help us find happiness reduce stress and anxiety, and build resilience, develop better habits. These apps actually help you to develop a better habit of happiness. And they work to improve your emotional, social, and physical health. And they're a lot of fun to use. They provide tips, articles on happiness. And by the way, the Insight Timer that I told you about has a lot of this stuff too, a lot of great workshops that you can listen to. They almost all have those. They have positive reinforcement features, badges, rewards, all this great stuff to, get the dopamine going in your brain. And they allow you to track your happiness levels over time, which is actually quite fascinating. Happiness apps to check out. Action for Happiness, get tips. It provides suggestions for simple actions that users can do based on the latest scientific research about happiness. There's I Am Daily Affirmations. This was great. I think daily affirmations are fantastic, and having a few really good ones in your mind all the time that you can pull on if your brain starts to shift into the negative is really important. But this also has a lot on self-care, which is basically what we're talking about today. Happify, which is such a great name, helps users cultivate happiness through activities and games based on positive psychology. And it will help you to train your brain and overcome your negative thinking patterns. So this is another thing you could explore and look into. All right, so we're going to go to the second strategy. This strategy is called pivoting. And when you're feeling bad, you are usually focused on the lack of something that is happening in your life, something that isn't there. And a negative emotion is starting to occur. And again, a negative emotion should not be a bad thing. It's just a warning signal to you. And it's saying to you, okay, something is starting to happen to me right now. And pivoting is the conscious decision to identify what it is that you do want and stop focusing on what you don't want. If you're having a particularly bad time, you can say, okay, so what is it that I do want right now? Do I want to continue to feel sad, angry, frustrated, or do I want to feel good? Do I want to feel happier? Okay, if that's what I want, how am I going to do that? And pivoting is the continual hour after hour process where you choose more positive kinds of thoughts. And I'll talk about some of what you can pivot towards as I go into the next strategy. This one is gratitude and appreciation. Now, everybody talks about gratitude and appreciation and, oh, it's so good for you, but here's why. Gratitude is very powerful because it activates the reward centers of the brain. When you are thinking of all the things you're grateful for or you appreciate in your life, you actually boost your neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine. You're producing this in the brainstem. It's so incredibly powerful. And you don't even have to do it for that long. You can do it for like 20, 30 seconds and you've started to produce those positive neurochemicals. So when you feel a negative thought coming on, think instead of something for which you are grateful. I start the morning and I used to think, oh, it has to be big things. And it doesn't. It doesn't have to be big things. It can be like, oh, I love the feel of my soft sheets in the morning. I love how comfortable and warm my bed is. I love that I'm going to get up and have this amazing cup of coffee that I love every single morning. I can't wait to go out in my patio and see all my beautiful flowers and how they're doing this morning. It's all of these sort of things. And I start to think about those things in the morning when I wake up. If I'm starting to think about anything negative or worry, I immediately shift the brain into appreciation and gratitude, thinking about all of the positive things that are going to happen to me today. And so you have to proactively practice appreciation and gratitude. And I think it's really fun. I call it going on a rampage of appreciation. And in the morning, I'm going to spend the first 30 seconds to a minute just thinking of all the things I'm going to appreciate about that day. So, of course, there has to be apps for this too. And we have gratitude apps. One of them is called Presently. That's a pretty big one. That one's a pretty simplified version, not too super fancy. It's just you have a gratitude journal that you can kind of, record things in. And it prompts you to write about what you're grateful for each day. No frills, really simple. Then you have one that's called Gratitude. And this app actually offers a variety of features. If you want to do something that's a little more interesting, you can write journal entries. You can construct self-affirmations, which I think are extremely powerful. and receive daily quotes, which I love getting daily quotes every day, and build a vision board that consists of images and goals and things that you would like to see. So these are a couple of fun things you could check out for gratitude. Let's go to strategy number 4. This one is called remembering. Remembering is about bringing to mind, and sometimes when I'm starting to feel bad, again, this is one of the practices I will put into play. I will remember a past experience or memory that makes me so happy. And when I'm doing it, I see all the details in my mind. Where am I? Who am I with? What are the sounds, smells? How do you feel? One of my favorite memories is of Christmas Eve, because on Christmas Eve, we go to a very special church service, and at that service, there's wonderful singing of Silent Night, and everybody lights candles all over the church, and everybody's singing together in this, they lower the lights, and all you see are the candle lights, and all of my favorite people that I love so much are around me, and I hear the beautiful music, and every time I think of that, I just totally get immersed in the wonderful feeling and warmth of that memory. And that will be one of those things I bring to mind if I'm having a hard day. I want to bring to mind some memory that I'm going to be able to stick with for at least 20 seconds and be able to really have a whole body experience with that memory. And another thing I recommend that my parents do that are being alienated is to bring to mind a wonderful memory that you had of your child and to think about it, to think about how wonderful that was to be in that moment with your child. And here is a 5th strategy, and this is called visualizing something positive. Now, this is different than remembering, because remembering is going back and thinking about a wonderful moment that you had and bringing it to mind. This is about creating a different moment. And this is actually a strategy that comes out of Joe Dispenza's work. And the brain has, and here's something very, very interesting about the brain that he talks about. The brain has the same activity when it visualizes doing an action as it does when it physically engages in the action. And of course, all athletes know this because they use visualizing all of the time. As you continue to visualize the things that you want in your life, you may create neural pathways in the same way as if you were actually doing these activities. The brain doesn't know the difference. So that means that by simply imagining a positive scenario, you're creating new neural connections and new habits, which is what Joe talks about is so important to do to shift your brain. So this is almost like, it's like creating a movie in the brain. And you see, again, all of the details, where are you, what's happening, all the smells, all the sounds, but you're creating this vision in your future. And again, anytime we do that, of course, we're dumping those wonderful neurochemicals into our brain that make us feel good. And that's why visualization is so powerful. And what I encourage my parents to do that are struggling with alienation is to take a few minutes every day and to visualize yourself having a really positive interaction with your child. Visualize the two of you having a great moment together, happy, relaxed, smiling, laughing, whatever it is, but just stick with it for about 30 seconds at least. Let yourself be totally immersed in it and start to visualize what is possible. Strategy number 6. Now, I think this is an important strategy to use when you're feeling or you're starting to feel particularly angry, frustrated or hurt by your child. And I think every alienated parent experiences this at some point, particularly I think in the beginning when you just first start, dealing with all that disrespect and that anger and the frustration that the child is bringing at you. And you're having difficulty even enjoying being with your child. I call this making a list of positive characteristics or attributes about your child and things you love about your child. Now, it's nice if you can write this down, but honestly, sometimes I just do it in my head. I'm starting to feel angry at one of my sons and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I could choose to keep focusing on the positive things that I don't like, but that's not going to help me with my child. I need to be focusing on the things I love about my child. So I will start to just make a list in my head of all the things that I love and I appreciate. And I focus on this list daily. I tell my parents, write these things down, focus on it daily, because the way that your child is now, the way that they're acting, and this disrespectful and rude behavior is not really your child. It is a child that has been under the influence of lots of negative thoughts and lots of negative discussions and lots of R&Ts, right? So that's not your real child. They have morphed into something, unfortunately, very different. And don't let your mind get stuck on how angry and frustrated you feel with that child, how you don't even know that child anymore. Because like I said, that isn't really your child. So, 6 strategies for rewiring. Get into the positive zone. You got to actively train your brain. Don't sit around waiting for somebody else to do it. Be proactive and realize there are lots of ways you can do it. Pivoting, you pivot away from the negative and you choose something like gratitude and appreciation, or remembering the positive, the moment when something great happened, visualizing the positive, creating a future movie in the brain, going through a list of positive attributes about the person you're struggling with or you're frustrated with. All right, well, there's 2 reasons for being the top of your self-care game. If your child has begun rejecting being with you, then self-care could actually prevent your child from totally rejecting you, or could at least slow down the progression of the alienation. Anything you can do to avoid unnecessary conflicts and stay positive with your child and in the situation you find yourself in is going to help your situation. All right, so I want to tell you a quick story about what happens when you don't stay positive. And this is with a family that I've been doing some reunification work with, a dad and his 2 children. And we've been doing what I would consider to be some really important family therapy sessions. We've gotten to some very important information that the child has been sharing with the dad each time. But after every session, I get a call from the dad and he starts to tell me all of the negative things that he is scared about, he is worried about, that he feels that we're not doing enough, it's not going fast enough. And there's all of this just flooding of negative thoughts that happen to him. And I start to listen to him and I almost get overwhelmed and pulled into these negative thoughts thinking, okay, maybe things are going really badly. And then I stopped myself and I was like, well, now wait a minute. Do you remember when she talked to you specifically about something you said that was really upsetting to her, and you listened to her and she heard you and you heard her? This is what is positive progress. I talked to him about all the positive things that I see in the situation. And he can hold on to that for a short amount of time. But then the next time we have a session, and again, he comes back and starts telling me all of the negative. This is an example of a person having a very difficult time with their negative thoughts. If you have already been severely alienated from your child, then self-care, I think, is even more important than ever before. Because you have now kind of, you've slowly begun to realize that things are just maybe not going to go back to the way you hoped for a long time. You don't know how long that'll be. You don't know how long it will take you to heal the relationship with your child. And you really can start to get super depressed. You can bottom out. And at this point, you've got to start focusing on yourself. You've got to work with the depression and the anxiety, the unresolved anger. You really need to get on top of these things, because if you don't, they could start to sabotage any attempts that you actually do have or connection you do have with your child. If they do come back into your life, if they do want to see you and be with you, you want to be ready. You want to feel like you have gotten in a good place for yourself. You are centered. You are focused on being ready to re-engage with that child, no matter what they throw at you, because they could throw a lot of stuff at you. So if you really wanted to be the best for your child, you need to dedicate yourself 100% to your self-care. How am I showing up for myself every day? What am I doing every day to help my inside job? Are you ready to assume a new mindset? I mean, a lot of us get stuck on the negative stuff like we talked before, and we don't really want to get off of it. We're actually probably getting a little bit of a reward from it, so we don't really want to get off of it. So do you want to do meditation? Do you want to do journaling? Do you want to do therapy? What do you want to do for yourself? couple of resources I'd like to throw out there. Joshua Coleman has done several wonderful books. One about When Parents Hurt. This is a great book to read, gives you lots of thoughts and ideas how to handle things if your alienated child, your adult alienated child, does come back into your life. He has another one called Rules of Engagement, and I think that's also a good one. There are other great books, some written by Amy Baker. She also talks about, repairing the relationship with your adult alienated child. Reading some books also can help you. But basically, self-care helps you to survive. Self-care is actually the best way to survive alienation. And in fact, I think it's probably the only way. And you keep a better relationship with your child if you're fortunate enough to still have one. So I'd like to take you back for just a minute to that story that I started with about the mom. And remember, I told you that I just saw her recently, and I did. And when we worked together back there a year or so ago, after I sort of pointed these things out to her about how she was having a lot of issues with these negative thoughts and they were keeping her very stuck, she started becoming aware of these thoughts. We worked on them together. We identified the narratives. We started retraining her brain to be more positive and using these techniques. She learned how to regulate her emotions. And that was a particularly important part of being around her son, because they were always saying how emotional she was and her mood swings. And she really figured out how to get on top of that for herself, so that when she did start spending time with her son, she really focused on the positive aspects of being together with her son. She didn't allow her brain to focus on what she didn't have all the time she didn't have. She focused it on the positive things she had when she was with her son. She said they started laughing more. They started having more fun. To this day, she's the biggest joker with him. They joke all the time. And she was redirecting her obsessing thinking about her ex to more productive, positive thoughts. And here's really an interesting thing she told me when I met with her a few days ago. And I hadn't seen her for a while. And she said, "You're not going to believe this, but I was talking to my son recently, and his father had made a decision to move. And the father wanted to move even further away from the mother. And he didn't tell the mother, of course. He doesn't tell her anything that he's going to do. He's just doing it. But the son knew it. So the son went to the mom and said, "You know what? What would you think about moving closer to me?" So he named a town that was closer to where he lived right now. He said, "What if you were to move there, and then, I don't know, maybe I could go to school there. Maybe it'd be fun for me to go to school because I had a good school system." And she said, "Okay." So she moved. And she said, "Then I found out that he was moving to a different place. And that place was about 30 minutes more away." And she said, "I realized my son had figured out that if he moved 30 minutes more away, he and I would have been more like an hour at least away from each other, if not more." And she said, "He didn't want to be an hour away from me. So he figured out a way to sort of trick me to move to a place that was going to actually be closer to him, because he didn't want to lose the connection with her. He couldn't really talk about what his dad was doing. That would have been disloyal. But he certainly was able to influence his mother to move closer to him and to keep them together, so they could actually continue to have the time they had together. And they text each other every day. They have a great relationship. She still doesn't have all the time she would like to have with him, but she has learned to accept it, and she has learned to enjoy what she does have. And her son's behavior obviously points to the fact that he really wants to have his mom around. So anyway, they successfully reunited, obviously, and they're still doing well. And she's taking care of herself, and she's feeling better and better all of the time being around her son. So ask yourself, where am I with my own self-care right now? What steps could I take to improve my self-care? Try and come up with a goal for yourself, just something little, small. Start working on the inside job and notice how your life begins to change. All right, my name's Lisa Rothfuss. I've really enjoyed presenting to you. I'm open to taking whatever questions you have. And I hope you have, maybe gotten a few resources you can use from this presentation about self-care.